Hello, hello, hello. This is Marty Dixon, and thank you for joining me. And today is actually the 29th of February of 2020, and we're going to be speaking about the shift of the ages, which is definitely no small topic. Let me get situated here. Okay, all right. And it's another title might be, what are all those planets doing in Capricorn currently? Now, I know that a lot of other astrologers have talked about the current stellium in Capricorn, and they've done an incredible job, but not enough can be said about it, really, because it's such a turning point in our lives and in the history as we know it. Let me just start by saying I'm so glad to be a part of this group and everything that everyone shares in terms of evolutionary astrology teachings and Jeffrey's teachings. I first started studying with him in 1994, and a lot of what he's taught, or what I remember of what he taught, I will be paraphrasing because I can't remember his exact words. I only have my notes to go by and brief descriptions of what he said in memory. But anyway, I'm so glad to be in such wonderful company of such tremendous astrologers. I really mean that. And I've been watching Zoom meetings from a few years ago, and they're just gems. They're just absolutely golden. The wealth of understanding and knowledge that's being passed on is just amazing. And I want to thank Linda Johnson for her dedication and her effort and her clear vision into bringing this group together, because it's truly a blessing. It's something that all of us have waited a very long time for. So anyway, let's talk about the shift of the ages. And again, my name is Marty Dixon, and this is my website, martydixon.com. And you can reach me there. I do facilitate a evolutionary astrology study group in Southern Oregon. And if you're interested about that or finding out more about it, just email me. Go to this website and email me, and my email address is there as well. Okay, let's continue. Okay, the first chart I want to look at is our current chart. I placed it in New York. And I also placed it in the natural zodiac, where I have Aries as the first house and the Aries 0 point as the ascendant. But what I want to look at is 0 degrees Pisces, which is right here. And in the natural zodiac, 0 degrees Pisces is going to occur obviously between the 11th and the 12th houses of Aquarius and Pisces. And right now, according to the precession of the equinoxes, we are at the 0 point Pisces, where we're really summing up and wrapping up the age of Pisces, which was around 2000 plus years. And we're really coming into the beginning of the age of Aquarius, which can be seen by, let me get my highlighter here, by right here, which is about 29 degrees, or the culminating degree of Aquarius. So we're right here at the fulcrum point between Pisces, which is 0 degrees Pisces, and 29 degrees Aquarius. And for those of you who know about the precession of the equinoxes, you know that they proceed backwards through the zodiac. So around 0 AD, so to speak, was 0 degrees Aries. And we've, for the last 2000 plus years, been transiting or transversing the age of Pisces. And we're now some 2000 plus years into the age of Pisces, where we're coming to the end of that, the relative end of that planetary experience. And we are entering into a new age of Aquarius. And I'm not going to get into the explanation of precession of the equinoxes because it's lengthy and it's involved and it would take too long. But I do want to say that talking about the ages and the shift of the ages is going to probably be a 3-part process, and this will probably be part number 1. But anyway, here's the current map of the skies here in the chart. And as you can see, there's a huge stellium in Capricorn. today. We have the South Node there, Mars, Pallas Athena, the asteroid, a significant one, by the way, Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn, and then Sirius out here in Aquarius. Now, if you look at this and you just kind of look at it for a moment, what I like to tell people, if they don't really understand astrology or aren't really crazy like this, like some of the rest of us who deal with it day and night, and they just have a sort of a passing interest. One thing that I tell people is just look at the map, just look at it, you know, put it on your wall or put it in front of on your coffee table. Just look at it, because these are all subliminal symbols. And in some point, they actually do sink into our consciousness on a subliminal level. They are encoded, and they always have been. They're archetypal symbols, and they stand for age-old archetypes that are as old as we can even imagine. We have attributed specific traits to the stars and to the signs of the zodiac. But I just want to mention also that not only do we have a stellium, a tremendous stellium in Capricorn right now, but the ancient Greeks, they placed a mathematical value to every part of the zodiac. And they prized the South Node and the North Node to the largest degree, and they gave them the highest mathematical importance in their study and in their use of the luminaries and the astrological sciences. And so what we want to look at here is our literal past, our collective literal past right here in the South Node is in Capricorn. So what's happening really as we here on Earth talk about our government, our politics, the way things are, the establishment, our structures, our institutions, our societal structures, and so on. We can talk about those things, but actually what we're doing, we here on Earth have incarnated at a time where we have been here before. We've been through a relative stellium in Capricorn before, certainly Pluto in Capricorn, and signature of a lot of these planets in a very similar manner, where we've had to question all of our societal structures and institutions and governing forces before, and we're back here again, because actually we all travel on the same bus, so to speak. And once we're in a very heated and pronounced situation together, and we recognize each other in that vein, we have to realize that we've been here before with each other as well. And because this stellium is actually conjunct the south nodes of Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, that means we have been here before. Those of us that have incarnated during this time have incarnated here for a very real reason. And we're, like I said, we're traveling on the same bus. We're back here again to face the same issues again together, perhaps in a different way, under different circumstances, but it's the same fundamental principles that we're looking at. Is how do we look at the structures of our society? How do we consider the reality structure that we're living in, and how is it changing, and what can we do about it? Okay, and here's our next screen. And continuing on 0 degrees Pisces, we live in extremely karmic times. If we consider that right now we are at 0 degrees Pisces, and we are ingressing to about 29 degrees Aquarius as we speak, in terms of precessionary time. The 29th degree of any sign is the most karmic degree. And so what we are actually doing in a historical sense is transitioning from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, but by going backwards from Pisces through Pisces to 0 degrees Pisces and crossing over to 29 degrees Aquarius, we're coming into the most karmic degree of Aquarius that we know of on Earth. And that means that everything that is of a Piscean nature is coming full tilt now and coming to a head before it transforms into life as we know it under an Aquarian influence. So for those of us who are sharing the same frequency, let me get my highlighter to work here for a moment. Okay. For those of us who are sharing the same frequency, things are evolving very rapidly. Like I said, we live in very karmic times, and change is the norm. Jeffrey Green, our teacher, said that well, he was only one of a myriad of teachers who predicted that this within our lifetime, that both Uranus and Neptune, with both Uranus and Neptune to Aquarius in 1997 and 1998, he said this about the times that we are living in. You'd better watch out, folks. Things are going to start to accelerate at such a rapid rate that you'd better hurry up and try and put sand in those shoes just so you can stay on the ground. And then he laughed. And he was absolutely right. He said these words, I believe, in 1996. I believe they were recorded in 1996. He's absolutely right, because not only do we live in karmic times, we are transitioning to the around the 29th degree of Aquarius in terms of precession, and processional age lasts for about 2,000 plus years. But also because it's in Aquarius, Aquarius accelerates everything it touches. It's ruled by Uranus, which is a sign of action and acceleration and full speed ahead. So we are really accelerating and evolving as fast as we can possibly imagine right now. And you can feel it. That's why I do what I do. We can just feel it. I don't have to tell anyone that. It's totally obvious. We live in incredibly karmic times. As the age of Pisces draws to a close, its ruling planet Neptune is in its home sign, which intensifies, deepens, strengthens, gives weight to, and focuses in on the highly balsamic and culminating times that we live in. So again, we're at the 29th degree, we're at the 0 degree Pisces, transitioning to 29 degrees Aquarius. And that means that everything that Aquarius stands for, we are experiencing in a culmination degree right now. And that means that, like I said, everything's really speeding up, and our consciousness is expanding, and our higher selves are becoming much more aware. And I would say, especially for those who are spiritually aware to begin with, that we are just, we are very much accelerating in terms of our spiritual growth as a group and as communities and as a planetary civilization. As precession continues backwards to the zodiacal wheel in our Earth relationship to the cosmos, the lessons that come to us cosmologically become ingrained upon our psyches and in time our very souls due to the inward realizations that come from precession. So as precession continues, and as I said, right now we're proceeding from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. What happens as this backwards motion goes through the zodiac is that the lessons from Pisces come to a head, and they also become ingrained upon our psyches and our very souls, because the backwards direction through this zodiac is a direction that is assimilated and osmosed by the body, by the emotional body. And so we're coming into many inward realizations from the age of Pisces that are becoming ingrained upon our very souls. The backward movement of precession, the nodes of the moon, retrogrades, and to a large part Neptune herself, feed our internal realizations. I put introspection or knowingness, direct knowledge, as opposed to the direct solar procession of the luminaries which serve to lead and direct our lives. So again, I'm just going to say that the backward movement of certain processes, which include precession, the nodes of the moon, which are primarily retrogrades, and to a large part Neptune herself, because Neptune rules remembrance and returning home, and returning to simplicity and returning to the beginning of all things, the origins that we can remember of being with God and being one with the Godhead. These all feed our internal realizations, as opposed to the direct solar procession of the luminaries, which tend to serve our external realizations. They lead and direct our lives. The sun is right now in the sun is in Pisces, and that's a direct and external realization. The solar realization is something that we understand in terms of going forward and learning from the seasons. And pretty soon the sun will be in Aries, and it'll be a more direct, more gung-ho, sort of invigorating and branching out sort of energy. So there are two directions in the zodiac, and one is the direction of inward retrograde motion backwards through the zodiac, and one is direction of direction through the path of the zodiacal wheel, and they balance each other. Neptune's strong influence also helps us to receive glimpses and memory of lives lived before the present that are affecting the present life. So wherever Neptune is in your chart, or wherever Neptune is transiting, wherever Neptune's planetary nodes are in a chart, it's a very strong influence that lets us look behind, lets us look in the rearview mirror and glimpse and remember the lives that were lived before we were here. And that's largely what Neptune's influence has on us. Like I said, individually and collectively, we receive glimpses from when we were one with God. That's what we're receiving now on a grand level that's affecting everyone in their own way, on their own level. Internal realizations, that which is ingrained upon the soul and that which we can never lose. So as we process through the early degrees of Pisces to the last degrees of Aquarius, we are remembering our unity with Source. We're remembering when we used to be with Source, Neptune, Pisces, the 12th house. And as we come to a close of the Piscean Age, those memories become very vivid and very real. A time when we were with God, when things were simple, when we first began spinning on this planet, and those Neptunian remembrances of when life was like simple and we just wanted to live together in peace. It's at the end of an age that these internal realizations come rushing toward us, wave upon wave, both personally and collectively. Multiple and essential relationships of all kinds between all things tend to speed up and evolve. Deep issues and repressed feelings tend to creep up and come to a head. So when we look at precession, it's not only happening from 0 degrees Pisces to 29 degrees Aquarius on an individual level, but it's happening on a collective level as well. And so there are waves of internal realizations and feeling and emotions that are going to come upon us more and more as we enter into this new territory of 29 degrees Aquarius together. What's going to happen is the remnants from the Piscean era are going to be impressed upon us to the point where we really get them on an internal level, and we will never lose them, but they come through the emotional body. And what also happens at the end of an age is multiple relationships of all kinds, and relationships between all things, all opportunity, all pursuits, all interests tend to speed up and evolve. And deep issues and repressed feelings tend to creep up and come to a head. And nowhere is that more prominent or more profound than in the transition between Pisces, which stands for an age of culmination and completion, and the preceding age of Aquarius, which stands for acceleration. Things are really rushing very quickly now, and we can all feel it. Okay, 0 degrees Pisces again, current times. For those of us that are sharing the same frequency. Oh, I already did this one. Excuse me just one moment. Okay. All right. Okay, 0 degrees Pisces continued, much is lost, but much remains. There's certainly an awful lot of that's been lost in historical knowledge. Anything that wasn't handed down through oral traditions, so to speak, was probably lost or burned or is still to be discovered, buried somewhere. But in spite of all of that knowledge and learning and transcribing and translating that we don't have access to anymore, we still have an awful lot of cellular memory and collective memory that we can draw upon. With the increasing illumination of the Aquarian Age, we are waking up to the need to not only deal with our own karma for our own soul purposes, similar to a waking end of life review, but to address our most deep-seated wounds and past life trauma, both individually and collectively. And so as we do so, we help to clear up more psychic space in our energy fields to allow our consciousness to expand. So let me just elaborate on that a little bit. Aquarian Age stands for light. It stands for light on the written page, or light upon the face, or being hit with the light of realization, some kind of epiphany or revelation. A friend of mine said he was in the jungle and he was meditating, jungles of central Mexico, and he was meditating, and a light beam came and hit him in the frontal lobe, and he received an incredible download during that time. But anyway, during the Aquarian Age and leading up to the 29th degree of the Aquarian Age, we can, as spiritual beings here on Earth, experience increasing periods of illumination. And this is something that Jeffrey talks about in terms of Uranian information and Uranian transmissions. They can come suddenly and repeatedly, almost in a frenetic pattern similar to lightning, and they can affect us and come to our consciousness and enter into our conscious selves, either awake or asleep, and help us to wake up to that which our very souls are working on. So we're waking up collectively and individually to the need to not only deal with our own karma for our own soul's purposes, which is very similar to a waking or conscious end of life review, but we're coming to address our most deep-seated wounds and past life trauma. We are definitely waking up to the need to not, what would the word be? Not employ any more karma in our lives, not to develop or accrue any more karma in our lives. We're trying to individually and collectively clear up the psychic space or the karmic residue in our life, so to speak, to allow our consciousness to expand. When we choose to deal with our own unresolved trauma, which is exemplified by the 5th to the 11th house axis of Leo Aquarius, it's like a gift because it opens our psyche up to better receptivity, like an antenna, and all of our God-given intuition starts to return. Along with 4-dimensional like capabilities, like living in right relationship with all life forms. That's a 4-dimensional like capability. It's not like we are attaining these abilities. It's just like we are reclaiming them once they had become blocked, once they had belonged to us. We're reclaiming them and getting them back. So what this paragraph is all about is that dealing with unresolved trauma helps to open up the psyche to better receptivity, like an antenna. And dealing with unresolved trauma has to do with the 5th house of Leo to the 11th house of Aquarius axis, which is very much highlighted now as we are, as our Earth is preceding into to occupy the relative degree of 29 degrees Aquarius in relation to the vernal equinox sun. The nodal axis will retrograde to the signs of Sagittarius, South Node, and Gemini, North Node, in May of 2020. So in early May, we're going to have a nodal shift, and that's quite important for this topic, because right now the nodes are in, the South Node, as you know, is in Capricorn, the North Node is in Cancer, and that's giving us some sort of a glimpse of how we are transitioning from Capricorn, the patriarchy of the past and patriarchal rule and patriarchal mindsets of reality, structures of reality, toward a more Cancerian or matriarchal type of existence on Earth. And then in May, we're going to see that the very nodes are transiting or ingressing to the signs of Sagittarius for the South Node and Gemini for the North Node. And a lot of what that means to me, from what I've understood, is that it really shows us how we are learning not only from both sides of the brain, learning to integrate left brain and right brain, which would be left brain, which would be the linear analytical way of thinking, and the right brain would be the conceptual way of thinking. But not are we doing that, but we're learning to really shrink the world and learn from the East, Gemini, and Western philosophy, Sagittarius, and combine the two. And the world is just getting smaller as we accept more and more of belief systems and practices and customs and traditions from both sides of the globe. Uranus will ingress to Gemini by July of 2025 and conjunct its own north node at 11 degrees of Gemini in July of 2028. So that's really something, one of the highlights, one of the things to look at in terms of the coming Aquarian age is how its ruling planet Uranus is functioning. And it's going to, Uranus is actually going to ingress to its north node in July of 2025. And then in 2028, and then in July of 2028, and conjunct its own node in 2028, which is going to be a huge highlight, very much of significance to highlight the Aquarian age. Pluto will ingress to Aquarius by November of 2024. So here we have a sort of a timeline or a relative vicinity of times when the Aquarian age is really being highlighted. And we can see that visibly through astrology. Jeffrey said that, please remember that astrology does not create life, it merely reflects it. So even though we have these ingresses and these conjunctions of, say, Uranus's north node in Gemini, even though we see that in astrology, that's not creating anything. It's only reflecting what is happening to us on Earth. And the way I look at it is, if we think of the sky as a mirror, it's sort of like a map up there, or a newspaper, so to speak, that's showing us what is happening on Earth, that we can relate to and try to translate, as opposed to just running on our feelings and not really understanding what's going on. I do believe that studying the stars and knowing the constellations and watching the night sky really gives us an accurate story. It really confirms our subconscious and helps to confirm that we're on the right track, and help us to understand what's going on. Right now in the western sky after sunset, Jupiter is bigger than life. I've never seen it so big and bright. And if nothing else, it's telling us to hang on, truth and freedom will prevail, and natural law rules. That's the way I look at it. And also when I see Jupiter so big, as big as that, it reminds me that we really need to think ahead of the future collectively, and try to work together and to really dream big and try to make those dreams happen and try to make those dreams come true. The internal lesson to be gained at the end of the Pisces age is simple. It is one of utter compassion for all life forms. The compassion certainly is a Piscean archetype, and it also, compassion relates to Sagittarius, because Sagittarius stands for all natural life forms and the natural way in which they function and perceive their life on Earth and each other. So the internal lesson is very simple at the end of the Pisces age, is for utter compassion for all life forms. And like I put here, what the animals know and how they operate, they don't know greed or hoarding or avarice or what would the word be? Vengeance. All that they know is to try to get along for the common good. And the internal lesson to begin at the end of Pisces age is also the sanctity of all life. Hopefully we'll learn these lessons. Hopefully we are learning them collectively. In short, karma as we know it is dissolving within the parameters of time as we know it. And we are entering into 4D reality. We don't want to keep reliving the same difficulties or problems in life. Jeffrey taught us that there's a natural end to all suffering and perplexity and confusion in this karmic cycle, which is a byproduct. The karmic cycle is very much a byproduct of 3D reality. He said, enough. There's a natural end to all perplexity and confusion here on Earth. He said that with the coming age of enlightenment, we will start to perceive time as a hologram in which the past, present, and future proceed simultaneously. And the reason I put this in here is because some of us can perceive this already. Some of us have, in meditation, can really feel that we've been here before. Everything is proceeding simultaneously. The future will be what it will be, but we have the present moment and the choices we make in the present moment to try to create from the heart and create the best future that is common and beneficial for all. And I want to talk a little bit about the Yuga cycles. A Yuga cycle is a Hindu concept. And it's also called the Great Year in Hindu terminology or Hindu belief systems. And a Yuga cycle is approximately 12,000 years of descending evolution, so to speak, and 12,000 years of ascending evolution or life experience on Earth. And if you look at this just briefly, you can see what's called a Satya Yuga, which is like considered a golden age. And this Satya Yuga lasts for approximately 4,800 years, going in this direction. And then we also, lasts for about 4,800 years in this section of the Yuga wheel. And then the Treta Yuga, which stands for a silver age, is approximately 3,600 years. The Dwapara Yuga, which stands for the Bronze Age, is approximately 2,400 years in duration. And then the Kali Yuga, which stands for the Iron Age, is approximately 1,200 years in duration. We are right here in this cycle. We are right in the darkest times of the so-called, Kali Yuga, and right at the base of the diagram and just entering into the ascending cycle of the Kali Yuga. And that fascinates me because this so likens the chart of precession in Western astrology and how we look at ourselves as just being the tipping point of a very dark and confusing time, 0 degrees Pisces, and just starting to see the light of day, so to speak, the clouds parting at 29 degrees Aquarius. They so liken each other, but they're from different cultures and traditions. A processional year, according to my teachers, an entire processional year is around 25,771 years. And we call it a processional year because that's just a phrase for a great year of around 25,771 years that it takes for an entire cycle to return back to the age that it originated in. In other words, if we're at 0 degrees Pisces right now, around 25,771 years ago, we were at 0 degrees Pisces before. And that 0 degrees Pisces point, as is explained to me through evolutionary astrology, is thought to be the origins of actually the last matriarchy, the originating moment when the last matriarchy was said to have been seated on Earth. And a processional year, or so to speak, 25,771 years in a processional cycle, is calculated to be the time taken by the sun to precess or move backwards through the 12 zodiacal constellations. So once more, I will just say that if we're at 0 degrees Pisces right now in a processional cycle, it was some 25,771 years ago that we were at that 0 degrees Pisces point before. And that was thought to be the beginning of the last matriarchal age upon Earth. According to the Yuga cycle doctrine, we are now living in the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, when moral virtue and mental capabilities reach their lowest point in the cycle, and where change passes over all things without exception. That means everything on Earth, everything, consciousness, God as we know it, all of the plants and the animals and Earth itself, all of existence is experiencing a veil of darkness right now where it's very hard to see, and it's very hard to see where we came from, and it's very hard to see where we're going. We're sort of flying by the seat of our pants right now and only have our heart's compass to guide us. The ancient Chaldeans, Zoroastrians, and Greeks also believed in a 12,000 year directional cycle of ages. When I say 12,000 years, I mean 12,000 years one direction descending, and 12,000 years of an ascending cycle where we're coming back into the light, back into the golden age. And that's interesting to me because this Yuga tradition or diagram is based on some of the oldest belief structures that we know of on Earth. Sri Yukteswar, the teacher of Yogananda, also clarified in the book The Holy Science that was written in 1894 that a complete directional cycle, which is 12,000 years descending or 12,000 years ascending, takes approximately 24,000 years in entirety, in which virtue gradually decreases and then gradually increases back to the golden age. Yuga cycles continued. 2012, as you all can remember, that was like the end of the Mayan calendar, so to speak. And I'm just going to put this in here briefly to refer to as a reference to what we're going through right now with the processional cycle proceeding from 0 degrees Pisces to 29 degrees Aquarius. But 2012, if you'll remember, represents a sort of galactic midnight in a sense. This is a quote from John Major Jenkins. It's like the end of Kali Yuga in the Hindu tradition. It's a time of maximum spiritual darkness. But there's something beautiful about this extreme polarity because it's like the still point between the breaths. And those of you who do yoga will understand that 2012, or say the time that we're living in now, just past 2012, is like a still point between breathing, between breaths, that point where we are able to unite with Source and allow our third eye to travel and perceive things beyond this physical realm. And John went on to say that it's in that still point between the ages where the insight can come through. Remember, we're right here in a very dark point where the insight can come through, and also the galactic alignment frames our understanding of these cycles and where we're at. So we're about to turn the corner in a sense. I think that it's pretty clear that historically we've been moving deeper and deeper into a kind of materialism, but at the same time, there has been a diminishment or alienation of consciousness from a direct awareness of its source. So John, in speaking his language about the galactic alignment in 2012, it's the same thing. He's in his great wisdom, he's just describing the same thing as the precession of the equinoxes and the point that we're at right now, going from a point of darkness or confusion or illusion and entering a point of clear thinking and light penetrating the frontal lobe and giving us clear vision and the ability to see ahead of ourselves. So we have been in a kind of materialistic world, but due to that darkness or that diminishment of, or alienation of consciousness, we're coming to now remember when we were one with Source, and we lived in a time when we had direct awareness of Source. The hopeful part of this requires that we learn to let go of or surrender or sacrifice the illusions, Pisces, the illusions that have kept us bound into the system of limitation and illusion. 0 degrees Pisces is the height of illusion, and it could be that we are all consumed by false fears or false doubts or not being able to see the light of day or really think clearly or see rise above the fog, so to speak, and see the total picture. but that's all starting to part now, and the light is starting to come in and give us clarity and vision and help us to understand our dreams and help reunite us to a direct awareness of source, so to speak. So the way that he put it is, it's always darkest before the dawn. And in this very dark period, the dark night of the soul, so to speak, collectively, we're starting to see the light rays come through, and they're very much welcome. And he also added that there's a time to fall asleep and a time to wake up, and that is the paradox of Pisces. We're in an in-between time right now where we're slowly starting to wake up. And it's confusing, but there's hopeful, and we're in very good company. This is also very likened to the Mayan prophecy of we are the people that we have been waiting for. And that I'll go into in a little bit in another lecture. But anyway, this was a quote from an interview I did with John Major Jenkins in 2008, and it's still true today, even more so than then. Precession lasts around 25,000 plus years, give or take a few hundred years. We'll actually give a few hundred years. It's likened to about 25,771 years for a complete precessional cycle. And what I wanted to say here is that now that we're entering the age of Aquarius, it is predicted that our pole star will actually shift during the next 2,000 plus years to the pulse, from the pole star Polaris to the pole star Vega. So that's quite dramatic in terms of what's going on and what's affecting this Earth and the cosmic luminaries that are above us that are directing us and giving us guidance and direction. It's quite profound. Astrological ages and their subages. This is a chart that was calculated by Mark Robertson, and it's in the book Structure of the Soul. Structure of the Soul, transcribings of Jeffrey Wolf Green, forwarded by Kristen Fontana and edited by Linda Johnson. So this is a diagram. It's a mathematical diagram of the ages. It's not, I wouldn't say complete, well, it's not completely accurate. It's just a mathematical diagram based on mathematical calculations. And as you can see, well, let's look at the Pisces age. It's looking at the Pisces age for relatively around 2,000 years, so to speak. And it's also dividing it into half, where we have the Pisces age here from 100 BC to 2060 AD. And then we also have another cycle within the Pisces age, which is roughly from about 980 to 2060 AD. So this Virgo subage of the Pisces age is splitting this Pisces age in half. And when we looked at I don't want to confuse anyone, but there's cycles within cycles within cycles in all cultures and all terminology involving the stars and the skies as we know them. But during the Pisces age of roughly 2,000 years, there is a subage of around 1,000 years, so to speak, give or take a few decades. And this subage really brings the Pisces age to a head. And let me explain this. We're living in the end of the Virgo subage right here, 1970 to 2060, which is considered a Leo generation. Not to be confused with Pluto and Leo, but it's just considered a generation, a Leo type of a generation in terms of how everything proceeds according to the zodiacal will, the astrological zodiacal will. So we are living in the end of the Virgo subage of the age of Pisces, where all Piscean archetypes that define that age come to a head, and the lessons therein become assimilated into the DNA of all people living through these times. So what we see here with the Virgo subage, which is the polarity of Pisces, that takes up literally the last half of the age of Pisces, which Mark has calculated from roughly around 100 BC to roughly around 2060 AD. These are just, like I said, mathematical calculations. This is just a guide. But what you're seeing in the subage is that we're all Piscean archetypes that define that age come to a head. and the lessons therein become assimilated into our very DNA. So what's happening right now is that this polarity of Pisces is helping to really drive home the lessons of the Piscean era. And it is through a polarity that every archetype is exposed and understood. And this one is the Pisces, the Virgo subage is just heightening the lessons that the Piscean age has given us, and helping us to see them a lot more clearly, and helping us to see how evolution takes place through both polarities, both in this case a Pisces influence and a Virgoan influence. And the Virgoan influence very much indicates or references our life's work here on Earth. And the Pisces influence very much highlights our communion with Creator. But they go together. You can't have one without the other. And so let me explain this a little bit further. A subage is a pronouncement of the age that it occurs in. So this is just a part of the Piscean age, as further defining the Piscean age for us. It is viewed as predominating the last half of any given age, a revisiting of the polarity of the archetypes that define and helped bring that age to fruition. And it is inherently seeking balance between the two archetypes. So what we're looking at here is Pisces, which for a very large part represents our communion with Source or God, and Virgo, which to a very large part represents our work and our life down here on Earth. They are inseparable. And right now, what's being very much brought to consciousness during this last generational segment that Mark has calculated on this astrological ages and subages chart, is that we're very much in the thick of things right now, and very much seeing in a very almost very base and dense level, and not seeing a way out of our little problems here on Earth, and not rising above the confusion and the fog and the illusion and the fears and the doubt, and really seeing what is really in store for us if we just follow our heart's compass and work together and have hope for the times to come. There's hope around the corner. A subage presages the next stage to come. And this is interesting because the Virgo subage is actually presaging the Aquarian Age. So in terms of being very much entrenched in very much earthly and dutiful work down here, and the confusion of the age that we live in, and how can we get out of this confusion, and how can we deal with our problems? There's so many of them right now on a global basis. Actually, what this is doing is it is highlighting and presaging the Aquarian Age, because this is really quite dark and confusing, and the Aquarian Age is offering us light and direction and clear vision. So that's kind of how the zodiac works, is it brings you down from one to another in terms of trying to balance one age or one subage to another. And yes, someday we Virgo subage of Pisces folks will be known as those who helped birth the next Aquarian age into conscious reality. So if it seems dark now and confusing, there is an undercurrent. Have faith. The age is transitioning. We are seeing the dawning rays of Aquarius now, even in a deep, dark, I would say kind of dense, earthly time here on Earth. To a great extent, the current subage of Virgo is helping us to discern beyond the illusion of religion, as we witness the ongoing violence born of fanatical religious beliefs and the illusion of separation or superiority. So let me get take a little sip of tea here. So what we have been steeped in for the last 2,000 years, to a large degree, has been religiosity. And that religiosity or religion is a consensus type of a archetype. And what more and more people are waking up to right now at the end of the Pisces age, the Virgo subage, is true spirituality. And it's an undercurrent that is growing by leaps and bounds. So again, the subage of Virgo is actually helping us to discern beyond the illusion of religion, which is a very base it can be a very base and dense type of belief system. And we are starting to witness the ongoing, as religion, as we witness the ongoing violence born of fanatical religious beliefs. So what's happening right here, where we are right here, is a lot of religiosity is coming to a head, and you see fanatical people in the name of religion and God performing violent acts. And it seems to be so out of control, but do know that there's help on the way. There's a spiritual undercurrent that's helping to counter all of this violence in the name of God, so to speak. And like I said, at the end of an age, everything that all the archetypes that define that age come to a head in spades. And that's where we're seeing so much mass confusion and disparity and confusion, and at times can just outright despair. But things are changing, and they always are, and they will. This is also evidenced in our government and those who support the extreme right, so to speak. Those illusory beliefs must come to a necessary head, the polarity between archetypes at the end of an age, to be collectively realized and absorbed into our souls via the emotional body. So we're learning great lessons here if we can stick together and hang on and have faith in the returning light. Let's see, one thing I wanted to say about this is that Jeffrey said at the end of the age, when things really can seem confusing as we're coming out of one paradigm and learning to perceive another, he said things can seem very chaotic, but out of chaos comes new creation. As chaotic as they are, if we can just stay within our heart and try to stay balanced and respectful of one another and work together and share and build up and be positive and think to the future, he says we don't have to evolve cataclysmically. We can evolve evenly and uniformly. The choice is up to us, what state we want to be in. And I would just say, stay grounded, stay centered, stay in love, meditate and pray and dream and listen to your dreams and listen to the messages that you get that come to the inner person or the inner heart, the messages from nature, and stay balanced in that way, and you will have a more smooth transition to the Aquarian energy, so to speak, than someone who stays in fear or separation or distrust. Just move here. Okay. And I also wanted to say about this slide that at the end of the sub-age, the Virgo sub-age of Pisces, what we are looking at now as well is what I call microscopic thinking by those in consensus reality, that many people are just in fear or distrust or confusion or chaos because they're not seeing the broader picture that is looming before us. They're not seeing the world as a whole, or the Gaia, so to speak, of our very human experience here. The Virgo subage also stands for all issues of a Piscean nature coming to a head before the ushering in of the age of Aquarius, which are seen and felt through the Virgo lens. So we're seeing things in bits and pieces, Virgo, and we're seeing things like, the health crises or the viral crises or the gun crises or the governmental crises or whatever it might be, crises of separation and fear and distrust. But actually, if we could look through the larger lens, Aquarius, we would see our way out and we would have hope and be able to better stem the tides that seem to come faster and faster to us down here on Earth. So when we rise up and get a larger perspective, which is an Aquarian principle, we realize that we can rise up and find a level of natural immunity, psychic awareness, spiritual freedom, and not have to delve in the density of religious fanaticism or the religious right or discrimination of all forms. So rising up in an Aquarian perspective gives us personal perception and a way to perceive a direction and a way of hope and guidance in our lives. and to leave behind discrimination and guilt and persecution, and in general, a preoccupation with perceived sense of lack, instead of realizing what we can achieve in unity. So at this time, the Virgo subage of Pisces can really emphasize, you might say, the more denser archetypes of Virgo as we make our way to the light. And it's just the way that evolution proceeds, is it goes from one extreme to another, and that's how we find our way forward, and that's how it operates. But we can make the transition smoother if we stay grounded and in our hearts and understand what the stars are telling us. I'll add that. Ages and their subages continued. The original matriarchy, just stated, during the last stage of Pisces, it was firmly established during the last stage of Aquarius. This is from Jeffrey Roof Green's book, Pluto 2. This is a time when the civilization known as Atlantis flourished, some 25,000 years ago. So if you think of an age as being 25,771 years, then when we had this Pisces age culminating and ingressing to the Aquarian age that long ago, the same point that we are at now, that was when we saw the gestation of the matriarchy and what we know as the civilization known as Atlantis. So we're in the same boats. We've all been there before. We're here again, and that's so that we can spread enlightenment and herald the Aquarian age again on our earth together. Because we all sit here with the south node of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in Capricorn, all of us are going to in some way have subconscious memory or linkage to Atlantis. And if you ask if you can remember why it was destroyed, it was a misuse of spiritual law. What actually happened at the end of Atlantis was a situation where in a small group of people, and it's going to sound so familiar to now, where a small amount of people are trying to have absolute power over the majority of the people. And the way they actually maintain their position of power was the misuse of spiritual law and basically trying to create social automatons. If you look at our current government and our governing party and what's going on in our government and our nation right now, you might want to reread this paragraph, pause the presentation and read this again, because Jeffrey spoke these words. I forgot to put his, oh, here he is down here, NORAC 1994. He spoke these words in 94. And if you look at our current government right now and our government agencies, they are absolutely trying to have absolute power over a small group of people, over the majority of the people. And this is what's going on right now. And Jeffrey explained to us, you know, this is 94, he said that he couldn't know what was happening right now in 2020. But when he said that, he said, you know, take heart, stay in your heart, follow the heart's compass, follow your natural inner compass. You'll know what to do, center and ground and listen for direction, and trust that you'll find your way, because things have to come to a head, and they have to be dark and dense before we can actually see the light. It's just a natural evolutionary process. There was a corruption factor, Capricorn, at the end of the last matriarchy, and all of us have actual collective memory and individual memory of the consequences of corruption. And that's why there's a progressive collective rebellion all over the planet against authoritarian forms of government or corruption at any level. That's powerful. That's because the age was coming to a culmination, just as we are now. And anytime an age comes to a culmination, the archetypes that have defined that age come to a head in spades, rapidly. That's where we are right now at the end of an age. That is everything coming full circle. How many in your individual lives here don't have a sense of, in a kind of strange Neptunian way, that things now are coming full circle on you? So all I can say to you, no wiser words were ever spoken. All I can say to you is that listen to your inner compass, center ground, be in nature, pray, meditate, dream, believe in yourself and others, and try to support and support each other and support what's good and what supports birthing and the natural processes and the natural laws here on Earth, birthing and growth and nurturing the matriarchal principles. So we're ushering in another matriarchal era after approximately 7,500 years of a patriarchal paradigm. And then Jeffrey added, we can either go into another matriarchal era of extreme imbalance, or we can enter an era of more balance. And what he's, in his wisdom, what he's saying here is that what we're actually doing right now, as opposed to leaving a patriarchal time here on Earth and entering a matriarchal time, we're actually looking to balance the two and not have such a great disparity between the two influences or definitions. And then he said, who would opt for polarity in terms of matriarchy and patriarchy, which could, cause more stress and more dissension between disparate factors, or who would opt for balance. And everyone said they would opt for balance. Here's a chart I just want to look at really quickly. And in this chart, we have Pluto in Virgo, retrograde, and it's actually opposing the sun of the native here in Pisces. And we have Neptune in Scorpio. So this is a chart from 0007 BC. And this was close to 25,000 years ago. It was close to a processional age. This is close to 22,000 years ago, give or take a few decades. So this is actually the Nazarene's chart, Jesus the Nazarene. And as you can see here, this was the age where Aries, 0 degrees Aries, was precessing to 29 degrees Pisces. And this chart I got from the message board. And it shows him as being born sun sign Pisces, moon Pisces, opposite Pluto, Pluto's polarity point. And I'm not going to say a lot about this chart other than just look at it. And you can see, you start to realize how prominent that 29 degrees Pisces precessional point was in this life and in this incarnation, and where he came in and sort of why he came to Earth and what he was trying to achieve and balance. I wrote here that the Nazarene was born in, according to the EA message board in 0007 BC, which again was about the turning point from the age of Aries to the culminating degrees of Pisces in a processional cycle. And it was at the beginning of the Pisces Age, so to speak, some 2,000 plus years ago. And it is the same point as the last age of Pisces, that was some 25 plus thousand years ago. So the ages just keep cycling and cycling and cycling, and will have similar influences during the ages, but different circumstances. And from 25,771 years ago, when the previous Pisces age was upon the earth, it was a long time ago, prior to the birth of Jesus, so to speak, that was thought to be the gestation of the origins of the matriarchal society upon earth, that we refer to as ancient Lemuria and Atlantis. So the cycles just continue, and they just keep perpetuating themselves and moving in and out of exact time periods, so to speak. Ages and their subages continued. Have faith. The age is transitioning. We live in very comic times. Many patriarchal societal structures are crumbling, and those who wish to hold on to their power and corruption within the old patriarchal paradigm structure are scrambling, desperate to hold on to their power. I can't emphasize this enough. You see this all around us, especially in our government and our institutions, that those who are in power are desperate to hold on to power. And Jeffrey was quite clear in describing that at the end of an age, especially one such as we are in now, that those who are in power through corruption, power and greed, are desperate to hold on to their power and will do anything to do so. But their very institutions and structures are crumbling before us. And we can pretty much see that as we look at the education system, look at the monetary systems, all of our societal systems and structures are very much being criticized and stressed and about to be reformed again. This is to be expected. It is the birth pangs of one age to another. A higher truth, so to speak, is being realized above the consensus view of things. And whenever higher truth is presented to the consensus, a struggle will always ensue. So we're in times of struggle right now. I mean, anybody can see that. A child can see that. And there's good news in that the way that we see things and the way that the old structures are set up in terms of patriarchal control and power, and the old ways of doing things in terms of greed and hoarding and selfishness and separation and fear tactics is really crumbling. A sub-age predicates a new age and also reemphasizes the end of the previous age. So this sub-age in Virgo is predicating the new Aquarian age, and it's also re-emphasizing the Piscean age. We are learning collectively from the Pisces age and / Virgo sub-age that we no longer have to suffer to be spiritual, that we no longer need to endure guilt or shame to deserve enlightenment. That's, again, another very deep subject, and it refers to what Jeffrey calls the Garden of Eden myth, where woman was thought to, or was purported to be less than man, and all of the sadomasochism and hierarchical elitism that ensued after that, in terms of man, so to speak, or the male being better than the female and subjugating the female. And that's a huge topic. But anyway, that's all part of the learning that we're gaining from the Pisces Virgo subage, is that we no longer have to suffer the religious ideologies of patriarchal institutions telling us what it is to be righteous or to be godly or to be spiritual. These are myths, and they come from a hierarchical, unbalanced type of a mindset that was set into motion around the time of 6500 to 5500 BC, when patriarchal thought and conditioning came into effect. A radical shift in consciousness, Neptune, always precedes the beginning process of a new age, as can be seen in the Virgo subage of Pisces. The shift would have to do with the Virgo-Pisces polarity, or the perceived separation between flesh and spirit. So again, I'm going to say that in the Garden of Eden myth, as Jeffrey explained it to us, is that woman tempted man, so to speak, and this is a patriarchal belief system and myth, but woman tempted man and man gave into the temptation. So woman was meant to feel less than and feel guilty and sin-ridden, and man was thought to hate himself for giving into the temptation. And therein you have the pretty much the guidelines for sadism and masochism. But in the old religious way of looking at things, flesh and spirit, flesh representing the female and spirit representing the male, were separated. But in the matriarchal scheme of things, prior to the patriarchal beginning of the patriarchal age in 6500 BC, the matriarchal view of things, flesh and spirit were in union, and they were one, and they were co-equal. Pluto in Capricorn, up until its ingression to Aquarius in 2024, is emphasizing the Capricorn-Cancer axis. Transiting Pluto stands for the world's soul, with its polarity point in Cancer. We're going to go backwards to go forward, so to speak. That's what every cardinal archetype requires. It starts with the elimination, Pluto, of false doctrine that flesh and spirit are somehow separate or contradictory to each other. To remove this false doctrine that stems from the Piscean age, then is when it's going to happen. We've then eliminated a truckload of guilt. And that's what Jeffrey said about coming out of old patriarchal belief systems and getting rid of the guilt of separatism and people, the sexes not being equal. And he's one of the main phrases he uses for the end of the Pisces age is we no longer have to listen to patriarchal belief systems and doctrines, and we no longer have to think that we have to suffer to be spiritual. He says that's an old belief, and we are well and whole and all equal, and that's just an old belief system that we don't have to give into anymore, and I can certainly attest to that. Okay, he also said that I have no better example of at the end of an age than the quote from the Bible, the last will be first. The best example that I have of the last will be first at the end of an age is the Person of the Year, Greta Thunberg. I mean, she when she got on the cover of Time magazine in January, I believe she was 17, and evidently it made our president angry because I guess he wanted to be on the cover. But now what we're looking at is the last becoming first. And this is something that is biblical and is true. And it's sort of a reversal of fortune, so to speak, where young people, female people, and even people of color, indigenous people, Native American, people of ethnicity, the oppressed, the poor, those with that opportunity, animals that can't speak for themselves, etc., are all becoming more valued and having more of a voice and being paid more attention to, and becoming spiritual warriors, so to speak. Another really good example of that, I love Greta Thunberg, but another good example of that is a woman who ran for the Senate not too long ago. I can't think of her name, but I'll try to think of it by the end of the presentation. She's a woman of color, and she ran in the state of Georgia, I think, and lost the election, but it's now very widely believed that the election was rigged. So we see people of ethnicity and people that were thought to be less than in the past, and the old way of thinking, sort of a fear-based way of thinking, a separatist way of thinking, and they're now coming to the forefront. And that's a really good indication of the end of an age, Jeffrey said, is when the last will be first. In 2024, Pluto's polarity point will shift to Leo, the sign of creative self-actualization. Okay. Okay. Pluto will be in Aquarius then. This represents a karmic fruition for the Pluto and Leo generation. For those who are waking up in a body, so to speak, experiencing bodily enlightenment and not having to have a near-death experience or go see God to really get to know God. We can do it here while we're here on Earth, alive in a body. For those who are finding a rightful place in the scheme of things, Leo, and taking up the challenge of our lives and the purpose of our lives and living our lives deliberately. And successive generations only build on these realizations. So we're coming into a kind of karmic fruition with Pluto's impending ingression into Aquarius in 2024 for the Pluto and Leo generation, because their Pluto polarity point is actually Aquarius, and we're coming into the Aquarian age. So what Leo represents to a large part is waking up in a body, rebirthing yourself, wanting to live, reclaiming your life force, reclaiming your right to be here, experiencing bodily enlightenment, like I said, rebirthing yourself, learning to find your direction, learning to live deliberately. It's very much a life-affirming sign, finding a rightful place to be here in the scheme of things, a purpose for living, so to speak. So with Pluto's polarity point, Pluto's ingress into Aquarius in 2024, a lot of the Pluto and Leo generation are waking up to these abilities, inherent abilities, because the Pluto polarity point will soon shift to Leo. Okay. One more thing I want to mention is that at the end of the Piscean age here, or the sub-age of Virgo, but we're here right here currently, the polarity of that age, Virgo, is accentuated in terms of we see religious fanaticism, all forms of false fears, illusion, guilt, shame, blame, separation, inadequacy, can all be seen being played out on the world stage and brought to a head within our collective consciousness to be dealt with and hopefully result in a smooth transition to the Aquarian age and the Aquarian influence. But things must come to a head for us to be able to make the change and to see clearly. Whether that change is uniform or cataclysmic is really up to us and the light workers who are helping to lead others, those of us that do spiritual work that are helping to educate and lead others through this highly transitional time period that we're in right now. Trying to get this page to turn. Remembering the Piscean age. So we're back to this chart of the Nazarene again. And what I want to show it real quickly is that Neptune is retrograde in Scorpio. This is one of the most healing, well, perhaps the most healing sign of the zodiac. It always has been. It's a signature of hands-on healing and extreme selfless service to healing humanity on a soul level. So not just physical healing, but healing people's souls. And this is the chart, like I said, of Jesus from around 7 BC. And you'll find that Neptune retrograde represents a door to Pluto, or a door to extreme, advanced, accelerated evolution. With Pluto in Virgo here, and its polarity point in Pisces here, which was his sun sign, this is indeed a consciousness capable of achieving regeneration and expressing the highest form of sheer and utter compassion. And this was the main figure of the turning point between Aries and Pisces. And we have to wonder what type of main influence or figure or worldly revelation will happen during our time of transitioning from the Pisces age to Aquarius. Depletion of the spirit versus flesh, or guilt-based sadist masochistic dominating superior or entitled mentalities, is what we're experiencing right now at the end of the Piscean age. So during the Piscean age, the beliefs of spirit versus flesh were fluent, and guilt-based ideologies and behavior was as well. But the Nazarene came to bring balance and to try to put an end to those and bring resolution to these very unequal ways of looking at people and men and women in general, and those that are entitled or feel that they're superior over others. So a lot of these dichotomies had to come to a head, and they were certainly worked on by the Nazarene, and they had to come to a head for us to see as people down here on earth to seek and try to find a common solution. Let's put it that way. Neptune has to do with the nature and quality of the light penetrating our frontal lobes, the melatonin that is produced in the pineal gland. It is at its most potent influence upon the pineal gland when it is in the water signs. So Neptune rules melatonin and the pineal gland. And you can see here the most powerful, intuitive, and light perceiving qualities of this individual, and the ability for all people during this time, for that matter, to really be able to see with the third eye and find their direction and their healing capabilities within themselves. When in the sign of Scorpio, the stimulus of melatonin stimulated by the pineal gland is at its most powerful and transformational capability. That's just another little glimpse of what happened during the turning of the ages around 2000 plus years ago. And I'll also mention that Jesus gave us the quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said that what I can do, you can do, and even greater things than this can you do. I believe that he was referring to the human capability to create from the heart. And that's what we're learning on a collective level now, hopefully. Ages and their subages continued. We've got to wrap this up pretty soon. Pluto purges the sign that it is in, whether it be generational or in a person's natal chart, which is specific to the house, that it is in a natal chart, and the aspects that it is making. With Pluto in Capricorn, the evolutionary intent is to confront all governmental, political, law enforcement, and social structures and institutions. Does it sound familiar? It's going on right now. Where does the Capricorn Cancer axis fall in your chart? It will show you how you are linked to the collective in regards to the shift from the patriarchy to the matriarchy. It will also reveal how our individual and unique relationship to the Earth Mother, because the Capricorn Cancer axis is considered to be an Earth axis. Are we realizing that we are meant to be caretakers and stewards of the Earth? We are currently experiencing a Pluto stellium in Capricorn. The emphasis that the Capricorn Cancer, this emphasizes the Capricorn Cancer polarity and the collective pull to return to a new matriarchal way of existence, Cancer. And we're going to go backwards to go forward. We already talked about that, where we have to remember our past and our linkage to times and remembrance, cellular remembrance, when we were here during the Capricorn, the transition to the Patriarchal Era, which took place around 6500 to 5500 BC. I don't have time to really go into that, but it was around the time then that we were transitioning from a matriarchal society to a patriarchal society. And it was around that time that man realized that he had a co-equal part in conceiving a child, creating a child. It starts with remembrance. Okay, and we're going to go backwards to go forwards. We have to remember where we've come from to see where we're going. It starts with remembrance of and the necessary elimination of Pluto. Pluto meaning elimination of the false doctrine that flesh and spirit are contradictory. We already talked about that. The Pluto generation in Leo herald the beginning of a generation's ability to wake up while in a body, and we talked about that as well, rebirthing ourselves. Okay, and I'm just going to leave this here because it's kind of weighty. It's talking about the inclination of Neptune, which rules the Piscean Age, and its influence during the age of Aquarius. Now, the north node of Neptune is actually Leo. And in the age of Aquarius, that means that the Leo-Aquarian axis is going to be greatly accentuated. And it means that because Neptune, the ruling planet, the ruling planet of the last age, is going to be is going to highlight the Aquarian and Leo axis in the Aquarian Age, that we are going to hopefully collectively simultaneously glimpse the potential for creating a heart-based civilization. So what I'm saying again is that the north node of Neptune is Leo, And as we enter the age of Aquarius, the Aquarius-Leo axis is going to be greatly highlighted and emphasized. And I think that's very much going to emphasize the north node of Neptune, which is remembering the Aquarian society in the last Aquarian age and helping us to lead ourselves forward by the heart, the compass of the heart, and heart-based direction. Neptune and our consciousness will be greatly stimulated and evolved quickly in the Aquarian Age, especially during Neptune retrograde periods that are like a door open to Pluto, according to Jeffrey. So as we're looking toward the matriarchal, a new matriarchal age and the Aquarian Age heralding that, if we learn to live simply and not hoard or be in greed, which is more of a patriarchal principle, or try not to dominate others, and try not to dominate others. Collectively speaking, we'd be creating a collective population that is now attuning to a higher power, which can then allow to be in harmony with that versus arbitrarily acting out of our egos via dominance and submission. This is a quote that I've paraphrased from Jeffrey. So let me try to make sense of it. He's talking about the patriarchal transition some 7,500 years ago, and how it was dominated by hoarding and greeding, and like I said, just dominating over others. It was out of balance. And so we're coming into more of a balance now, but we're actually coming to learn to balance both the patriarchy and the matriarchal influences and ways of thinking, so that all people can come to more common terms, and we won't have such a polarization that we'll have to deal with, and life will be easier, and we won't have to live in so much turmoil or opposition, because there will always be, even in time of matriarchy, there will always be opposing factors. So we want to balance those factors so that all people can live in peace and live together and cooperate. And that's what the matriarchy is all about, is balance and inclusivity, not exclusivity. We've had enough of that. So he said that if we can attune to a higher power, we can then allow to be in harmony with the stream of Dharma, is what he was saying here, versus arbitrarily acting out of our own stupid egos via dominance and submission. So hopefully we're learning to seek the higher picture, Aquarius, and follow our heart's compass, Leo, and we'll help to calm down this next transition to the matriarchal age with as less turmoil and separatism as possible. So we're in the transition of the ages, and we're saying goodbye to the Piscean age. We're moving toward the Aquarian age. I just put that the polarity point of that age is Leo, and everything operates through polarity. We have to embrace a holistic vision that generates models of reality at any level that are balanced and equal. So balanced and equal for more people this time, not so many disparate factions and people working against each other. We want to try to include people that think differently than us, as opposed to exclude them. These generate political and economic systems that are equitable to all concerned. This is Aquarius. This is true democracy. On a spiritual level, a natural level, we are rebalancing ourselves in the context of the totality of nature. And to do this, Leo, we have to take charge of our destiny, not be, quote, victims to it, which is an older, more base Pisces principle. If we do these things, the world will change in a very positive, metamorphic way. Via the Pisces age closing, yes, there will be crisis and suffering via withdrawing from the old age, necessarily so, but it will bring the age to culmination. And in so doing, we can lean toward the Aquarian Leo vision. In the old times, the old ages, when the Aquarian age prevailed before, it used to be called the Golden Age. That was also a description of the Satya Yuga, if you'll recall that. So maybe it's just possible, if we think about such things, to recreate such an age, a golden age. That's what we're headed toward. Hopefully it'll be a smooth transition. So here's a couple of things that are coming up on the horizon. And this was a solar eclipse that we had in December of 2019. As you can see here, we had a huge stellium in Capricorn. Any child can see that something's going on. Right here is the South Node. And the South Node is in Capricorn at 8 degrees, or it was in December 25th of 2019. Now, or actually in the summer eclipse of June 21st, the South Node is going to ingress to Sagittarius, the last degree of Sagittarius. And we have a smaller stellium in Capricorn. But look at the significance here. Look at the astrological story. Right here, we have a stellium in Capricorn. So around Christmas of last year, things were really heated. And we were really feeling the weight of the patriarchy and the imbalance and the unfairness, and people just feeling despair, and what can we do? We've got a corruption, rampant corruption in our government, and what can we do about it? We feel so helpless. But look at this South Node at 8 degrees Capricorn, and it's preceding Jupiter, which is going to reveal the truth and bring things to light and help us to see clearly, reveal the truth from the lie, so to speak. Here at the summer solstice solar eclipse, and by the way, we have 6 eclipses coming up this year as opposed to the normal 4. It's really going to be a rocking year. Here, Jupiter is now preceding Pluto. So this planet of clear vision and future vision and opportunity and new starts, and like I said, separating the truth from the lie and seeing clearly, and seeing from a more the right side of the brain, which is more conceptual and understanding more of signs and symbols and phenomenal reality, reading phenomenal reality that is all around us. This Jupiter, this right brain, is now creating a whole new evolutionary cycle. It's separating from Pluto, the world soul, as we might call it here in this chart, and it's creating a new evolutionary cycle. So there is a lot of freedom and a lot of freeing up of mental energy and psychic energy and spiritual energy, and even our very beliefs. It's freeing up our very beliefs and allowing us to find opportunity, find new direction, find new vision and direction. And I would add to that, searching for new hope and really believing in that. And then it will be joining Saturn later in the year in December. So that's interesting to me that you see this huge difference between Jupiter behind the South Node in last December, and it's now in a new evolutionary cycle, a separating cycle from Pluto. So something we can really, it will be in June of 21, of June 21st of this year. So we're really seeing a new hopes on the horizon, a new direction, a new vision for the horizon for all people. And you can see it clearly in these symbols. And then the South Node, of course, is ingress to Sagittarius. And that stands for natural law and direct vision and direct knowledge and understanding source, and also the compassion and the right way of living that all natural people know, indigenous people know. Of course, we can see that in the animals, that they learn to live by compassion, and we can draw from that, because this is accessing actual roots for all of us, ancient roots for all of us, when we lived closer to the earth and knew how to live naturally and observe the directions and patterns and natural signs that were all around us. Okay. All right. So moving right along here. I just want to add to this that Jupiter, standing for truth and freedom and belief systems, natural law, is in new phase to Pluto. The South Node is ingress to Sagittarius, accessing collective remembrance of that which is natural and the phenomenal reality, and learning, like I said, to read the signs and the symbols all around us, the truths that are self-evident and self-regulating, so to speak. And then this is the winter solstice of this year. And as you can see, we still have Jupiter here, we have Saturn here, we have the South Node at 19 degrees Sagittarius, conjunct the Sun. So it's a little bit more interesting. It's just progressed a little bit more. Right after the November 2020 election will be the solstice, suggesting the foundation for the formation of new societal structures and forms of government that are more equitable to all. Aquarius, suggesting protests, or it could suggest protests or demonstrations of some sort. Jeffrey talked about that. And let's see, possibly a recount. In any case, it looks like new collective ideals taking hold with great resistance from the consensus and religious right. Saturn and Jupiter ingress to 0 degrees Aquarius, right here, conjunct the planetary south node of Neptune in Aquarius, right here, and squaring Uranus in Taurus, retrograde, right here, creating a whole new evolutionary cycle separating from Pluto and Capricorn. So if you study this chart, things are really happening. You can see the story evolve. If you look at Jupiter and Saturn separating from Pluto and some type of evolutionary theme that they're working on, some kind of evolutionary point in our collective journey here on Earth. And if you also look at, they're squaring Uranus in Taurus, yeah, which has something to do with the Earth and Earth changes, so to speak. And there are plenty of those happening. Well, they have always happened, but they're happening in a lot now as well. And these are both retrograde, meaning that we're looking back to times that might have seemed turbulent in the past and trying to in olden times and in ancient times, people thought that earth changes and earth movement was somehow a punishment to them, and that they had to change their way of thinking or praying or doing ceremony. But in this case, we're just observing what's going on and knowing that we're in a new evolutionary cycle, and that the south node is actually conjunct the north node of Uranus in Gemini. So to me, this gives us conscious hope of learning to keep our minds open and learning to see clearly and learn from the past and not fear what's going on, but know that we are coming into more of a natural, balanced way of living. And we can see our way through if we only keep the faith, so to speak, and know that there are natural forces that we can observe that can help to direct and lead us and help us through these very troubled and darkened times. I want to talk about the 500-year mutation period. And I just want to reemphasize that astrological age is figured to be about 2,000 years, give or take a few hundred years. That's how Jeffrey put it. In actuality, most astrological ages are around, say, 2,400 years in length. But there is a 500-year mutational period between ages. And I just mentioned here that in 1520 was the time of the Reformation, when Martin Luther led the Reformation against predominantly against the Roman Catholic Church and papal authority, and in ancient Rome, and or in ancient Europe, and this was something that was he was challenging the religious and political institutions of the time. And I think that's interesting, because look exactly what we're doing now in terms of religious institutions and patriarchal institutions of all sorts. And also we're in such a time of religious separatism and extremism and fanaticism that this really rings a bell for me, that this would have happened close to 500 years ago when we started actually transitioning from the Pisces Age to the Aquarian Age. So between the Pisces Age and the Aquarian Age and all ages, there's roughly a 500-year mutation period. We have now entered the 500-year mutation period of the Pisces Age, coming back to the Aquarian point. The Aquarius Age was here 25,000 plus years ago before. So in a sense, we're making a galactic return. The last Aquarius Age directly correlates with what is called the matriarchy, and which existed from the Aquarius Age all the way through to 6500 to 5500 BC. This is when the patriarchal transition began. And like I said, this was a time, prior to this, people lived communally, possessions were shared. There was nothing like a nuclear family. There was not a head of the family. There's no hierarchy as we know it. During this time, there's no evidence of any wars between people, nor any psychological or emotional violence to any person. What Jeffrey is referring to here is the matriarchy prior to this transition to the patriarchy right here. There were no sky gods. There was no projection of somehow an anthropomorphic being in space whatsoever. In the matriarchal time, what we would call God was Earth, or what in the Western language is called Gaia, which the American Indians would call Mother Earth. In other words, prior to the patriarchal transition around 6500 BC, when man knew that he had an equal part in making baby and all sorts of land ownership and paternity rights were adopted. In other words, Earth and the totality of nature during the matriarchy and all of its forms was considered to be conscious and co-equal to the human organism. So in effect, the matriarchy was a time that lived relative to natural law, the principles and laws in nature, which are self-evident and self-correcting. And because everything was understood via natural law, there was no belief systems. Belief systems are a product of patriarchal society and conditionings. They're saying that you must believe this or against that, or it's either or cause and effect. This is good, that is bad. It's a system of duality. There were no belief systems. It was all understood through direct experience or communion with source. And this is what Neptune stands for. We're coming to the age of the end of the age of Pisces, which is ruled by Neptune. So this remembrance of direct experience with source is becoming very prominent. And Jeffrey also pointed out that the Pisces archetype in the zodiacal wheel squares the Sagittarius archetype, so to speak. And he says these prompt each other. Both are remembering the way things we were in terms of nature and in terms of communing with God. And he said they prompt each other. A square is not a bad aspect necessarily. It's just a prompting and an alerting to the commonality of both and what both contain and how they can work together. And like I said, both of the archetype of Pisces and the archetype of Sagittarius relate to communal experiences and tribal experiences and living and sharing under natural law. In that time, the matriarchy, the human consciousness had the capacity to actually communicate with the totality of nature. I love that. And specifically the world of animal and plant, Sagittarius. And of course, we're talking about the Sagittarius archetype and the Piscean archetype that ruled during the age of Pisces. But they work together. They are joined by a square, by a common aspect. So the archetypes are joined as well. And specifically the world of animal and plant, they became teachers of the human organism and vice versa. This was God through direct experience. So that's what we're remembering is the time prior to the patriarchal transition right here. We're remembering the matriarchy right now. We're in that 500-year year mutation period between the Pisces Age and the Aquarian Age, and we're entering into a new matriarchy. So we're transitioning right now, as we did back then, but toward a matriarchy instead of a patriarchy. And we're going to sum this up now. So the last Aquarian Age was some 25,000 plus years ago, lasted until roughly 6,500 BC. Then transition from the matriarchy to the patriarchy took place between 6,500 and 5,500 BC, roughly a 1,000-year transitional period. The patriarchal imbalance led to distorted worldviews of those who dominated others, including the feeling of entitlement, selfishness, greed, superiority, hoarding, exclusivity, domineering, and subjugation of others. Minorities and second and third class citizenry was adopted and accepted. Slavery was also adopted and accepted by those in the ruling class. Class structure developed as opposed to the matriarchy, which lived within communal laws and natural communal influences. The matriarchal time that lasted over 20,000 years showed historical evidence of communities that strive toward equality, acceptance, sharing, inclusivity, cooperation, and building up for peace in times of peace. What a concept. And preparing for peace in times of war. We're not exactly doing that now, and we should be. We should be preparing for peace in times of peace so that we don't encounter war. Existence seemed to be communal, and there was no contrived hierarchies during the last matriarchal time. Life was lived according to the observable laws of nature and the elements of commonality and balance inherent to natural laws. Laws were lived by what people perceived by their hearts. And that's the time that we're moving into now with the Aquarian Age and its natural polarity in Leo. That we are all much more alike than we are different. People just knew it back then. Jeffrey mentioned that the next matriarchal existence on Earth will probably not be so polarized as the one before, because as a quantum principle, it is natural and subliminal to learn from history and cellular memory over the ages. So he asked us who would opt for more polarity in the new matriarchy and who would opt for balance. And actually the matriarchy does stand for balance. It wants to incorporate all factions and all belief systems and find a common ground for all people. We're learning about the matriarchal and absorbing matriarchal lessons, whether we know it or not. It's involuntary and subconscious, and subconsciously we're all awakening to a new matriarchal opportunity and the hope from a new balanced and supportive and shared existence on Earth. And as a very good friend once said to me, who was part Native American, she explained, the circles are coming closer together. We are much more alike than we are different. And all of this is highlighted to astrologers through our current Capricorn stellium, conjunct Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in the South Node in Capricorn. And as it's progressing, we can see how it's progressing. It's progressing profoundly. Anybody can see that, especially through the eclipses of this year. And I don't know if I put this in there or not, but toward the end of the year, both Jupiter and Saturn are ingressing to Aquarius. I think it's around December 20th. I think it's around the winter solstice. So the signs are there. All of creation evolves, everything, even God evolves. Even our thoughts evolve. Everything evolves. And a basic tenet of history is that all is cyclical. Nations and civilizations rise and fall. Our Western civilization is at the apex of its development. We have a standard of living undreamt of by our forebears. However, our technological civilization is built on the most tenuous and fragile of foundations, electricity and petroleum. Remove either of these foundations for more than a couple of months, and our civilization will collapse rapidly. We will find ourselves in a literal dark age. This was recited by a man by the name of Stephen Verstappen and this is his website, but he's talking about living communally and starting in your own neighborhood with your own neighbors, and learning to bypass the institutions and the structures of society and the police forces and the laws, not disobey them, but live for yourself and build and do and create for yourself, and build it from the ground up. Start with your own family, your own neighbors, your own community, and build structures of your own, and think and work and act and develop and create locally. And a lot of what he's talking about here about the fragile, uh, the fragile technological, the fragility of our technological civilization, and how it's based upon, of course, electricity and fuel, petroleum. This is very much an end of the age, Virgo sub-age, technicality type of an issue. So right now we are enlightened and we have great development and great resources, and we have so much at our fingertips. We're so advanced, but we are on the brink of the tip of destruction if all of our dependencies, which are mainly electrical or fossil fuel, if they were to dwindle, then we would be, because we're so technologically dependent, Virgo, we would really be looking at a collapse and perhaps great calamity. But if we as communities can make the conscious choices to cooperate, build up, share, and promote that which sustains all life, and plan for peace in times of peace, we can opt for, what a concept, we can opt for peaceful, cooperative evolution and not cataclysmic. And one more thing I just want to put in here for your perusal is a Sibley chart. We've had a lot of people talk about this. I actually use, this is one that Jeffrey uses with at 3 o'clock in the morning with Uranus, I'm sorry, Gemini rising as opposed to Sagittarius. But one thing I want to point out here is I did notice when I was working on this that in 1776, Pluto was at 27 degrees Capricorn. And right now, I believe it's at 29 degrees Capricorn. So what we are looking at is, in our day and age, almost the complete completion of a complete Pluto cycle. So the founding of our nation as a liberated entity is approaching a Pluto return. And that gives me great hope, because when I look at the structures of the way our government is going now, and it causes, it's just terrible. It causes great grief, and it causes great, I wouldn't say fear, but it causes just a lot of grief and despair. And if I know that we're looking to a Pluto return, and if I know that the foundation of our nation was in 1776 was basically based on the confederacy principles of the Iroquois nation, who conducted their nation through tribal councils and ceremony on the eclipses, then I have great faith that we can return to the Sagittarian principles with our nodal axis ingressing to Sagittarius South Node in early May, and remember the common sharing principles of democracy, and find our way in this darkness, and find hope through the fog to a new light of direction and new hope and new dreams, both individually and communally and collectively. So that's the end of my talk, and I want to thank you for coming with us. And see if I can find my end slide here. I'll just end it at that. But anyway, thank you for coming with us. And I appreciate your attention and your patience. And thank you for coming. And I hope this has given you a little bit of direction and illumination and hope. Thank you for coming, and welcome back.